Your Honor, I'm going to be asking when we resume to admit State Exhibit 58, which is the stipulation. So once the jury's in, I'll stand up and ask to admit 58 and ask you to read the instruction of the stipulation.
Does the defense anticipate? No, I don't anticipate that you have any objection. You signed it. So I will ask. When he asks to move it in, I'll ask if there's any objection. And then once it's admitted, I'll read 2.3 stipulations, and then I'll read the stipulation itself.
Okay. Your Honor, I'm also going to go ahead at this point. I told the defense I would just go ahead and ask to admit State Exhibit 57, which I will do in front of the jury, but these are the medical records. I expect they have a fair amount of objections they want to put on the record. I was suggesting we just do those right now, and then, assuming Your Honor maintains your same ruling, I will just stand up and then admit at Exhibit 57 when the jury's in the room.
Let me ask you, if they have a substantial amount of objections they want to put on the record, which I understand and I'm not surprised about, and I've got the whole jury back, is there any reason why we can't hold off on that till either the afternoon break or...
No, we're going to do the medical records right now with the first witness. That's why I'm trying to...
Okay. All right.
We're going to do Dr. Mendoza right now.
All right, well then there is a good reason. All right, so objections as to medical records not already heard. I know you want to put some stuff, sure, on the record, but anything additional to any issues that have already been resolved by Judge Williams?
Judge, the issue was resolved by Judge Williams. It was in the motion in limine in Section B, so I won't go through everything that's there. Just quickly, though, to reiterate the point, the problem is that the records are completely unreliable. I'm going to go through it with Dr. Mendoza on the stand in front of the jury about how unreliable these records are.
Absolutely, I expect that. I mean, I think it's a weight issue and not necessarily admissibility. I'm not weighing in on Judge Williams' rules. I accept his ruling. I know you're not happy with his ruling, but that's the ruling, and I expect you to cross-examine and challenge the reliability of them with the witness in front of the jury.
Certainly, and the reason that it's untrustworthy was outlined in the motion, so I'll rely on the written findings for that. But I'll also just point out a few things in the records themselves that make it perfectly clear these records are not reliable. They're completely contradictory to one another. There are pages where it says Matthew Terry refused to answer. There are pages where it says he answered and said he was attacked. There are pages where it says he answered and said the injuries were self-inflicted. And Dr. Mendoza, in her deposition testimony, said a lot of the things that are in there either are entered by a doctor who doesn't attribute the note to. There were things in there that I outlined in my motion that were attributed to her that she didn't actually enter in there. There are things that are notated in there that she indicated would just be pre-populated and would just continue to be entered over and over and over to make it look like there's multiple entries, but it came from the very first day. These records do absolutely nothing to show what actually occurred, what might have been said, and is one of the most damaging pieces of evidence against someone who may never have even said any of the things that are contained therein. Again, we had a hearing. I understand we're not relitigating it, but additionally, I've noted, as we talked about yesterday, on page 31, it says that officers were at the bedside at the time. On page 58, it indicates 2 officers were bedside, and although that goes to the related issue that you already ruled on regarding right to remain silent.
In your favor.
In my favor, which is great, but not on this issue.
I was a smart judge then, wasn't I?
Well, Judge, I never say that you're not a smart judge. I do disagree with some of your rulings.
I know.
And in this respect, for the medical records, these records are coming in without what is required as the foundation to have them defeat the normal hearsay objection. The only reason medical records generally come in as an exception to hearsay is because they are couched in presumed reliability. But that presumption doesn't come about if there's indications in the records themselves that there's a reason to distrust them. And as I pointed out, there are multiple reasons in the records themselves that prevent that presumption from being in place. And without that presumption, those records stay pure hearsay. So what is coming in now is a violation of the Confrontation Clause, a violation of Crawford versus Washington, and should not be coming in.
All right, I hear you. This is, again, though, the issue that Judge Williams ruled on. I'm not weighing in on how I might have ruled. It's the same, ruled differently. But this is where I often like to say I'm just a gatekeeper. I'm not saying that they are. I'm not making any final findings on them. just that they can be presented to the jury, they come into evidence, and you sound like you have a lot of great arguments that you're going to make and point out to the jury while you're going to argue to them, who are the ultimate finder of fact on the credibility and of the evidence that you'll be making to them. So I look forward to seeing that. But I'm not changing the rules.
Understood.
So, do you want me, you need to move them in, as you said, in front of the
Right.
jury. Do you want to perfect your objection now? Do you want me to just do any other objections that you say already nothing other than previously argued?
That's fine.
Okay. All right then, are we ready for the jury?
All right, so does the defense have an objection to the stipulation?
They indicated they did not.
Okay,
they
so
signed it.
that's in.
Well, you still got to move it in.
I understand. Okay, and you have the instruction to read for
I did.
stipulation? Okay, great, and then I will move those two in then, okay.
All right, and then you're going to call the doctor and move medical records, or you're going to move the medical
I'm going to move the
records?
medical records and the stipulation in first and then call the doctor.
Okay. All right. Defense ready?
Ready.
Let's get the jury. Yeah, I would get that there. We're ready.
All rise, jury entering courtroom.
Jury is present and seated. Everyone else may be seated at this time. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, welcome back. Good afternoon. Did everyone have a nice lunch? Did you go out in that windy weather out there? All right. Well, I think that that's just part of what we know is coming, and we've made some announcements about. Let me ask you: was anybody exposed to anything about this case during the break? No, let the record reflect no hands. Did anybody discuss this case amongst yourselves or with anyone else during the break? Excellent. Let the record reflect there are no hands. All right. Welcome back. We're going to pick up where we left off. I'm going to turn to the state.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move into evidence State's Exhibit number 57 and 58.
Well, I have 58 in my hand. 58 is the stipulation regarding identity. Is there any objection to that?
No objection.
All right. That 58 will be admitted. 57 is what?
Medical records.
Any objection other than previously discussed to 57?
Not other than previously discussed.
All right, 57 will be admitted at this time. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, as to exhibit number 58, which is a stipulation, I have a very short instruction to read you and then the stipulation itself. When parties agree that certain facts are true, that is called a stipulation of fact. You must accept stipulated facts as having been proven. However, the significance of these facts, as with all facts, is for you to decide. In this case, the stipulated fact that you must accept as true is, I'm going to hold it up, it has the evidence tag on it, 58, it'll be in evidence, which means it'll go back into the jury room with you. It reads as follows: stipulation regarding identity. It is hereby stipulated by and between the defendant Matthew Robertson Terry and the state of Florida that K.E. Baker, the person named in count 1 of the indictment in this case, died on May 28, 2022 in the vicinity of 6209 Kite Ridge Drive in Hillsborough County, Florida. And the autopsy of K.E. Baker was conducted on May 28, 2022 by Ashley Perkins. We hereby certify that the foregoing stipulation is made in good faith and for the reasons herein alleged, dated this 7th day of November 2022, and then it is signed by Justin Diaz, Matthew Terry, and Jamie Kane. And again, I'm going to give it to the clerk. It will be in evidence. Mr. Diaz, are you ready to proceed?
We're ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Mr. Dirks, call your next witness.
Dr. Michelle Mendoza, please.
Dr. Mendoza. Dr. Mendoza?
Yes.
Good afternoon and welcome. If you'll come forward to be sworn as a witness.
Can I just leave this here?
You can.
Right this way, Doc. You would stand right here, Mr. Doc.
If you'll raise your right hand, please, be sworn as a witness. Thank you. You swear affirmative testimony you give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, I did.
Thank you, Doctor. If you'll follow the bailiff now to the ramp that leads up to the witness chair, please watch your step. When you get to that chair at the end, Doctor, go ahead and have a seat. Make yourself comfortable. That microphone in front of you is fully adjustable. The green light is on, so it is on and ready to go. You may proceed, Mr. Dirk.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Doctor. Please introduce yourself to the jury.
Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Mendoza. I'm an emergency medicine physician. I currently work for Team Health Special Operations Physician Group. I just recently worked for the last 4 years at Tampa General Hospital as an attending emergency physician there.
All right, so I'm sure there are certain requirements for you to hold the job that you hold. So let the jury know about your educational experience, your work experience, things like that to qualify you to be the emergency physician.
I graduated from New York University School of Medicine in 2005. Between 2005 and 2008, I completed my emergency medicine residency at the Virginia Commonwealth University Emergency Medicine Residency Program. I also had a fellowship at the University of Massachusetts Medical School in Worcester, Massachusetts, that completed in 2009 in emergency ultrasonography. And then between that time period until 2018, I was an emergency physician in the state of Massachusetts, the vast majority of that time until 2016 at the University of Massachusetts Medical School in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is a trauma level 1 trauma center. After that, I worked for 2 years at Newton Wellesley Hospital Emergency Department, which is a community hospital associated with Massachusetts General Hospital System, which is the Harvard University medical group. And then in 2018 is when I transferred to Tampa and have been working at Tampa General Hospital, also another level 1 trauma center.
You're licensed to practice your profession here in Florida?
Yes, I am, for the last
Anywhere
4
else?
years. Also in the state of Massachusetts.
And so, help me with the math. How many years have you actually been working as an emergency physician?
If you are including my residency training, where I was granted my MD in 2005, this is my 17th year now.
All right, 17 years of working in an emergency facility capacity.
Yes, that's correct.
Can you give me any idea as to how many different patients you've seen in that capacity?
It's a lot.
Yeah.
I would say that on average, in a, say, 10 to 12 hour shift, we're supposed to be seeing, on average, about 2 patients per hour spread over that time period. So there can be, in the low 20s, mid 20s, but especially at places like Tampa General or UMass Medical Center, where it is a level 1 trauma center, the patient numbers can get much higher, where you're seeing 30 plus patients per shift. So if you multiply that by 17 years and, anywhere from 15 to 20 shifts a month, that's really quite a bit of patients.
All right, you talked about level 1 and how those numbers can increase. Give us an idea of what a level 1 facility is and why that is so.
All hospitals can achieve different level designations as far as trauma centers. That is conferred upon them by the American College of Surgeons, and it has to do with the capacity of the hospital to treat patients that arrive in a trauma setting. The level 1 trauma center, which is the highest level designation that you can have, is the one that has the most capacity to treat the gravest injured patients. So the requirements usually include the ability to have on-call staff 24/7 in various specialties, including not just trauma surgeons, emergency physicians, anesthesia, neurosurgery, orthopedics, ear, nose, and throat physicians, plastic surgery, a burn center might be another designation as well. So it has to do with what kind of care can be provided at that facility.
Okay, so if you're level 1, you got to be ready for anything.
Correct.
And you got to be able to conduct a quick evaluation to figure out what needs to be done, and if something needs to be done quickly, to do it.
That's correct.
All right, so I want to talk to you a little bit about Tampa General Hospital and their procedures, or how they go about operating the emergency room. In terms of, is it a team concept? Is what happens when you get information that someone is going to come in on some sort of alert status to your emergency facility?
In a setting like Tampa General, many times we do have the early sort of notification that a patient is inbound with certain types of injuries. Given the mechanism of the injury, so for example, if someone was either in a car accident or had a gunshot wound or a stabbing, anything that had, or a fall from a height of some sort, like off of a tree or a structure, there are certain criteria that we classify the patient as either what's called a trauma alert or a trauma activation. This is not unique to Tampa General. Many academic centers, level 1 trauma centers, have these specific designations. At Tampa General, a trauma alert is sort of the second highest class of notification, where the patient sustained some sort of traumatic injury, and according to the criteria that were met, and there's a whole list of those, they need to be evaluated immediately by the emergency physicians, the trauma team, because there's a possibility that they have some sort of significant injury that needs to be treated within a certain time period. A trauma activation is the highest level of trauma designation that a patient can have in Tampa General. And these are the patients that are the most gravely injured, whether it's from a car accident or any other trauma. And these are the people who are either going to lose their life or their limb, or they need immediate OR intervention, at least from the information that the paramedics can glean from the scene. So we need to be activated right away.
Okay.
And that means an entire slew of people come to the trauma bay, people from the OR, the blood bank gets notified. There's a lot of things that get activated as a result of that.
And to that extent, it's definitely a team effort.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. And I presume also as well that when you get sort of information from a third party, like an ambulance or whatever, from other emergency individuals, you presume the worst.
That's correct. We have to presume the worst and be ready to treat anything that comes through the door. And many times the story is not accurate, so we have to just be ready for anything.
All right, let me start to focus your attention back on May 28th, 2022. Do you recall being working at Tampa General in those early morning hours of May 28th, 2022? And do you recall treating an individual identified as Matthew Terry with the date of birth of January 18th, 1975?
That's correct. I was working a shift at Tampa General that night. It was an overnight shift that was from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And in the early morning hours, we were called to the trauma bay for a trauma alert. He was not named that because, as many traumas are, they're assigned kind of a code name when they first arrive, so that we, even if we don't have any identification on them, we can at least start charting on them and start ordering things in case we don't have their given name.
All right, I have medical records, exhibit number 57 relating to the care of Matthew Terry. You get a chance to take a look at those records?
Yes, I have.
And just to make sure, are those the records that you have been provided?
Yes, these are the ones.
All right. I'm going to ask you some questions relating to the treatment and care of Matthew Terry at the emergency bay that morning, and so please feel free to refer to those records if necessary. You talked about the alert status regarding Matthew Terry. Can you tell us what was the alert status of Matthew Terry before his arrival on May 28th?
He was designated as what we call a trauma alert, so the second highest classification.
And again, what does that mean, trauma alert?
So again, a trauma alert is someone who has criteria that presents possible significant injury that would need immediate evaluation by the trauma team and the emergency physicians, but not necessarily the most gravely injured. For example, not significantly abnormal vital signs or a significant amount of blood loss at the scene.
Okay. All right, so as you mentioned, the trauma team is alerted. You're awaiting the arrival of Matthew Terry. Tell us what happens when Mr. Terry arrives and how you and the treatment team treated Matthew Terry.
So as with any patient, the entire team is already waiting. Usually there are several resident physicians who are MDs, graduated medical school, but are completing their residency in the various specialties like emergency medicine and surgery. So there are several members of the team that are all performing different functions. In a trauma alert situation, I am the captain of the team at that time. The trauma activation is when the trauma attending surgeon will show up. Many times during a trauma alert, the trauma attending will eventually show up at some point, especially if we do uncover an injury that we need to intervene upon sooner rather than later. But usually for a trauma alert situation, the emergency medicine attending is the lead physician at that moment. So when Mr. Terry arrived, we were all waiting for him already in the bay. Nursing staff, in addition to the resident physicians, are all starting to transcribe things that are being done at that time. So he arrives, we immediately receive report from the paramedics that tell us what his presentation is. So they let us know that he had penetrating wounds to his neck. They provided the vital signs that they obtained on the scene, any interventions that they had prior to arrival, and then he's transferred from the EMS stretcher onto our stretcher in the trauma bay. At that point, the paramedics exit, and we perform what's called a primary and secondary survey. Primary and secondary survey is an algorithm, so it's a set of examinations that we do with every trauma patient so that we make sure we uncover any and all wounds and injuries that a patient might have. So the primary survey is a very brief, we call them ABCs, and that is assessing a patient's airway, their ability to breathe, and their circulation, because any compromise of those three things is a hard stop that we have to intervene upon right away, because the patient could die if something is not fixed right at that moment. So that's a very, very quick, brief survey checking whether or not he's able to speak, whether or not his oropharynx is blocked by blood or any other debris potentially, and then whether or not his pulses and his vital signs are normal or not. Then we move on to the secondary survey, which is a more detailed evaluation, and it's a head-to-toe evaluation, and we truly start from the head all the way down to the toes, just calling out every single possible injury that we find from head to toe. And that is looking for any sort of injury to major organs or vital structures at that time. All during this time, nursing will be getting IV access to draw blood work, and we, depending on the mechanism of the injury, we may start doing things like ultrasounds or x-rays to look for other signs of internal injuries. And then after we have completed that secondary survey, we then take stock of anything that we found to then inform what the next step would be, whether it's to get more imaging like a CAT scan, or did we just need to go in the operating room, or do they seem stable and can they just sort of go at that point? It really depends. In Mr. Terry's case, our findings included wounds on either side of his windpipe on the front of his neck. We did not detect any other wounds that required any other intervention. He was stable as far as his vital signs go. The wounds were not actively bleeding. We sort of do a cursory look to make sure there aren't what we call hard signs for neck trauma. And what that means is looking for the possibility that something very vital in the neck could have been injured. So the vital things in the neck include the carotid artery, the trachea, which is your windpipe, the jugular vein, and your esophagus, which is the tube that goes between your mouth and your stomach. And the hard signs would include massive bleeding, air bubbling out of the neck, or what we call an expanding hematoma, which would be bleeding that's not exiting the neck, but it's just sort of building up underneath the skin, so it's just kind of expanding wide. And he did not have any of those. So at this point, given that we felt that he was stable to undergo further imaging, we elected at that point to order what's called a CT angiography of the neck, which looks for any damage to the structures within the neck on CAT scan. He went off to go get those studies done. He was then admitted to the hospital to have consultation by the ear, nose, and throat, or the otolaryngology service. And they are the surgeons that specialize in any sort of issues between your nose and your neck. And he went to the operating room to undergo what's called a laryngoscopy, which is just a look directly with a special tool at the windpipe and the airway. An esophagoscopy, which is a camera that looks at the esophagus, and then they explored the wounds in his neck to make sure there weren't any other structures that were visibly injured, and then repaired the lacerations or the cuts to the front of his neck.
All right. So when you evaluated him at the beginning, you said there's a lot of things going on, a lot of people saying and contributing a lot of things. Is that right? That's correct. Is someone a scribe? Is someone documenting that information for the purposes of entering them into the records, so that everybody recalls what happens?
Correct. There are multiple people writing. There's a representative from the trauma team typing away on the computer. There's a representative from the emergency medicine physician team, and there's a representative from the emergency medicine nursing team. So there's at least 3 people documenting at any given time as the evaluation is occurring.
So you're the captain of the ship at this point.
That's correct.
You're the captain, and then eventually, after all of that is done, and the medical records are produced, you then electronically sign off on Matthew Terry and the documents related to his care.
That's correct. Once I'm no longer required at either that particular patient's bedside, and I have a moment to write down my thoughts over the case, I'll write a short note detailing, just a kind of a summary of what the emergency care was in the trauma bay, and then I sign off on the note that the emergency medicine resident has written as my representative in the trauma bay.
All right, so based upon your description and based upon the care that was provided that you've described, what came in as an alert, which could mean anything, and you're assuming the worst, when you and your team evaluated Matthew Terry, you realized that he could, it was not a life-threatening situation, and that you could follow care on a relatively non-emergency basis. Is that right?
That's correct.
So the CTs and the different radiographic findings and tests were administered to Mr. Terry, and he was admitted. And do you recall whether or not he was referred to a psychiatrist or psychological or psychiatric evaluation?
So once he's admitted to the hospital, I'm no longer part of his care, but from reviewing the records, yes, it looks like there was a psychiatric consult that was obtained.
And what can cause that? What can cause a reference for a psychological or psychiatric evaluation?
A psychiatric consult can be obtained on a patient if there is any potential possibility, especially in a trauma situation, that they were there's either a situation where the patient committed some sort of act to harm themselves at that moment, or that they suffered significant emotional distress from what event happened to them, that might require some sort of medication to help them in their recovery process. There might be a psychiatric consult if there's something during the evaluation that comes up where the patient may make statements that don't make sense to the treating team, physicians. It could be any number of reasons.
All right. And particularly in Mr. Terry's case, if you would, make reference to page 50 and 51 and see if that helps you determine the reason for the psychiatric reference or referral.
Yes, so on those pages, this was a note from the trauma team for what's called the tertiary survey. So I had already explained what the primary and secondary survey was of the trauma team. The tertiary survey is the next assessment after those primary and secondary surveys are performed. For lack of a better term, once the dust settles, they get to reassess the patient to make sure there really isn't anything else that was missed, and to follow up on anything that might have been done after the trauma bay in the interim. And this note was written by Nuri Nelson, who is part of the trauma team and is a nurse practitioner, a member of the trauma team. And she indicates the exam regarding the wounds, and also the findings from the CAT scan during the emergency medicine visit, and then also at that point that a psychiatric consult was ordered.
And if you would take a look on page 27 of the records to determine whether or not that evaluation was done.
Yes, so on page 27, this is by Dr. Chachokta, who is one of the psychiatrists, so psychiatric physicians at Tampa General, performing the consultation that had been ordered by the trauma team. And the reason for request is always noted whenever there's a consult of any sort. And the reason for request that was indicated here was self-inflicted neck laceration, reports feeling depressed.
All right. And you mentioned in the first part of the evaluation of Matthew Terry, you needed to find out whether if he was in need of emergency care, and whether there were substantial or any injuries to his neck, which require additional intervention. How can you describe the injuries to Matthew Terry's neck in terms of the size of the wound, the depth of the wound, and what structures were involved in the neck and were not involved relating to those two injuries?
So initially, we do a visual or clinical assessment, and his injuries were, on, like I said before, on either side of his windpipe. They were going straight up and down on either side. They were not actively bleeding. So even though the tissue was open, the wound was open, there wasn't blood coming out of it. The bleeding had stopped. There, like I said, there was no bubbling. There was no expanding hematoma. In order to get a better view of the extent of the injuries, that's when we ordered the CAT scans, and the results are in the chart. They start on page 19 as far as the findings of a CAT scan, and under the setting of soft tissues, it's described as bilateral, which means on both sides, bilateral laceration, soft tissue defects overlying the anterior bilateral sternocleidomastoid muscles. And they give measurements of 4.4 by 1.6 by 2.3 centimeters on the right side, and then 8.6 by 1.8 by 2.4 centimeters on the left. So just to make sure that everyone knows what the sternocleidomastoid is, it's this muscle belly that you'll sort of feel when you turn your neck over here. And you have them on both sides, so you can feel them when you turn your neck. They are fairly close to the surface of the neck, and overlying that you have skin, fat, what's called fascia, which is sort of like a sinew in between the muscle bellies. There's a very, very thin layer of another muscle called platysma that's right over that, and then there's a sternocleidomastoid. So depending on how much fat you have in your neck, you can either get to your sternocleidomastoid in just a couple millimeters, or it might be a couple of centimeters before you hit them. And it looks like on his imaging, he had, like I said, two wounds that were at least a couple of inches long, by a little more than half an inch wide and deep.
All right, so there was no injury to the carotid, obviously.
That's correct. There's no other injuries to any of the vessels in the neck, and there don't appear to be any injury that is visible to the esophagus. However, the esophagus can sometimes hide injuries even though there's no signs of it on the CAT scan, which is why we do the additional testing procedure that was done later.
Obviously, his windpipe, his larynx weren't affected, at least from your examination of it.
At that time, it did not seem like they were, but again, we always double check with the laryngoscopy and the esophagoscopy.
The external jugular vein, was that affected at all?
So when we do these CAT scans, there's a choice of doing either what's called an angiogram or a venogram. So the angiogram looks specifically at the arteries, whereas venograms look at the veins. Typically, for the smaller veins like the external jugular, we would probably see that clinically on a patient. Same thing with the internal jugular, because that is a very, very big vein. But the results wouldn't comment on any of the veins because of the nature of the study. However, they would have commented on secondary findings like bleeding around the jugular, that would say consistent with a possible jugular injury if there had one, and there was nothing of that sort in the report.
And the reason I ask you, because many of us, when we heard the jugular vein, it sounds serious. And it sounds like something that would need emergency medical intervention. So that's my question. My question is, one, is it possible that the external jugular vein was injured or damaged in this process?
So I feel like I have to just clarify one thing. There are two jugular veins, the external and the internal. The external is actually one that you can see if you ever, your kid ever does the breath holding because they're throwing a tantrum. It's that big vein that pops out. That's the external jugular vein. The internal one you'll never be able to see no matter how hard you hold your breath because that's quite deeper, even though it is about 10 times the size of the external jugular vein. So whenever we think of, oh my gosh, he's gotten his jugular vein, that is referring to the internal one. The external one could be easily repaired or the bleeding stopped just with manual pressure if there was any injury to the external. The internal one, that would be a much more involved injury and much more involved repair.
Do the records indicate that Mr. Terry had a blood transfusion?
No. There's no mention of that.
Despite you talked about the severity or lack of severity of the injury, is it nevertheless possible that there could have been a substantial amount of bleeding relating to those injuries at some prior time?
There is a possibility that he could have bled at the scene, and we would not, obviously, without seeing any sort of direct evidence of it, we would not necessarily have known that. However, we did do blood work upon his arrival, and his blood counts at the time were normal. They do take a little bit of time to reach sort of an equilibrium, and so a repeat blood test can sometimes be done later on to see if the blood counts are stable. But typically, if there was a large amount of blood loss at the scene, whether it's from a penetrating wound like a knife wound or a blunt injury, there would have been other signs that we would have noticed without any blood work. Rapid heart rate, very low blood pressure, neither of which were present upon his arrival.
You mentioned there was testing done. Was there also testing done which revealed any blood alcohol in Mr. Terry's system?
Yes, it's standard that we obtain blood alcohol levels and drug screens on every trauma alert and trauma activation. And his alcohol level at the time was 72, which translated to the kind of more commonly known reference ranges when you hear of the legal driving limit of alcohol of 0.08. This would be equivalent to 0.072. Okay,
and when was that blood drawn, which revealed that result?
This blood work, let's see, that would have been drawn right when he arrived.
Don't have to get a specific but if you can give it a ballpark as to when that blood was drawn.
It would have been immediately upon his arrival because that would have been with the IV that was obtained upon his arrival.
And his
so
arrival?
6 a.m.
6 a.m.
Around that time.
All right, and so along with that, are you aware that the body naturally eliminates blood alcohol at a kind of standard rate?
Yes, usually it's at about 240 grams per day, anywhere from 170 to 240 grams per day, which is, when you get down to it, it's about 10 grams per hour throughout the day.
Okay, so help me with the math a little bit. If that blood was drawn at 6 o'clock, and let's say at midnight, 6 hours, if you do the math, what would his blood alcohol level be then at that point?
So it would be probably around 130 if he wasn't consuming any more. So that's assuming that he had a fixed amount at a given point, and at midnight it was probably around 130 and he didn't drink anymore and it descended down into 70. by the time 6 o'clock rolled around.
Okay, and if you've given that result, do you know the difference between legal blood and medical blood?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, there's a conversion process where we get records from the hospital and they give us a number, and then that number then is converted to a legal amount, which is different from that. Are you familiar with that? I'm not going to touch it if you're not familiar with it.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, all right, we'll leave that for another day. All right, so just to be clear, you earlier explained the moving over the decimal points basically is what you're doing. A 72 is in terms of what you've described as a 0.07 milligrams per deciliter. Does that sound right?
Yeah, 0.07, that's correct.
0.07, and I asked you my hypothetical, assume it's midnight, and then you do the math, and you said it's 1:30. So does that mean it's a 0.13, just to make sure?
0.13 would be the conversion, yes.
And the 0.13, that would be medical blood.
That would be the alcohol content in the blood.
In the Tampa General Hospital records.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Do the records indicate that Mr. Terry underwent any surgery for the repair of the damages to his neck?
Yes, he underwent a procedure with the ear, nose, throat specialist where, again, they performed a laryngoscopy to look at his windpipe. They performed an esophagoscopy to look at his esophagus, and then they explored the wounds of the neck, which involves probing the structures and kind of lifting up the muscle belly, and they then proceeded to repair the lacerations.
Do you know approximately what time that repair was done? Was it done the same day? Was it done immediately? Can you give us an idea of when that repair was done?
It was not performed immediately. I'd have to just double check where the operative note was. One moment. So the record indicates that the anesthesia encounter started just after 4:30 on 5/28. So it was later that afternoon.
Okay, 4:30 in the afternoon on the same day that he was admitted at around 6 o'clock in the morning.
That's correct.
Okay, and we've talked about damages to the structures, to the neck, and that sort of thing. You wanted to make sure that his airway was able to function, he was able to breathe, and he was able to speak. And so were all those things clear? He was able to breathe on his own. He was able to speak. Is that correct?
He was able to breathe on his own. We attempted to ask him.
No. So,
Rephrase that.
yeah. So my question is, the only question, did his voice work? If you don't know, then that you don't have to. You don't have to take.
I don't know if his voice worked.
Okay. May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Dr. Mendoza, I have no further questions for you. Thank you very much.
Cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Dr. Mendoza.
Good afternoon.
One thing you said at the beginning of your testimony was interesting. You said that when patients first arrive, sometimes the things you've been told, the story you've been given, isn't accurate.
That's correct.
And that's because some of that information is coming from EMS, dispatchers, police, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And because some of that information is coming from so many different sources, sometimes it gets recorded in the records incorrectly, right?
Yes, it does.
And particularly, there are notations that are in these records that we've discussed in regard to the question of whether Mr. Terry's wounds were self-inflicted or not, that look to be like an opinion, but are actually just a question of whether that's something that maybe needed to be ruled out, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So it's not your opinion, you have no opinion whatsoever about Mr. Terry's injuries and whether they were self-inflicted or caused by someone who attacked him.
That's correct.
Now, on page 6 of the records, it actually shows a resident named, and I'm probably going to butcher the name, Yuya Burkhart, who signed on as treating Matthew Terry at the very beginning of the trauma service. But that was actually you that treated him at the beginning of trauma, correct?
That's correct. Dr. Burkhart is one of the residents that I work with, and typically when a patient appears on our electronic tracking board as a trauma patient, whoever is going to become part of that treatment team, there's usually a resident involved with an attending. They'll just put their name on it to kind of indicate to everybody else that this is going to be my patient as the resident from their perspective. And then I'll sign on whenever I can.
And in fact, that brings up a good point. Sometimes you can't make the notations in the record that you otherwise would because you're busy treating the patient.
That's correct.
And sometimes it can take a significant amount of time to treat the patient, so you can't get to that till much later.
That's correct. If the treatment of the patient is paramount, then we can sort of write everything afterwards.
Sure. And there was actually some confusion when Matthew Terry came into the trauma, right?
That is correct.
And sometimes notes get attributed to one doctor, even if they're written by another.
Sometimes that can happen, yes.
And for instance, on page 16 of the record, page 11 of the records, there's a notation at 602 that was begun by a resident named Lawrence Seymour, but it was actually you that was evaluating Mr. Terry at that time, right?
So Dr. Seymour was one of the residents that was participating in the evaluation of Mr. Terry. The resident, more often than not, I would say 99.9% of the time, the resident is the one who first starts the emergency medicine note for any patient that comes in. And then once the attending, in this case me, gets involved, we will sign off on it afterwards. So even though this looks like it was my note, Dr. Seymour was the one who started it, and I basically co-sign it, attesting to the fact that I agree with what he has written, that it was something that we found together during our evaluation and documented as such.
But you can be listed as the author of a note that you actually didn't author.
So correct. It's a quirk in the computer system where because I'm sort of the final signatory on the note, I get listed as the author, but the vast majority of the wording on the actual note is typed out by Dr. Seymour, and then there's a very brief note that is my own writing later on. If I can find the actual page for you so you can refer to it. It's on page 20, and it's timestamped 646 under ED course. And patient found with bilateral neck lacerations, unknown history, will obtain labs imaging, dispo per trauma team, which means that we're going to await the trauma team's evaluation to know how to disposition the patient, which is where they're going to end up after the trauma bay.
Sure, and that note, as you said, was 40 minutes later, right?
That's correct.
And there were even times when multiple doctors and multiple nurses are getting assigned to multiple patients all at once and they accidentally click on the wrong patient too.
That's correct.
There are even pre-populated parts of the notes that end up coming up and looking like something was said or done later, but that is just coming from the very initial parts when somebody maybe came in through EMS and there were things that had to be ruled out in that regard.
That's correct.
Now, you were asked about a site consult. Site consults can be ordered because somebody else suspects that a patient might have an issue that needs to be dealt with, not necessarily based just on anything that a treating physician or even the patient or someone else may have indicated, right?
That's possible, yes.
Now, regarding Matthew Terry's wounds themselves, there's no way to know whether Matthew Terry's wounds were self-inflicted or caused by someone who attacked him, right?
That's correct.
Any reference in his personal medical records about self-inflicted simply were things that your team needed to, or another team later, would need to rule out.
That's correct.
Now, his two injuries, you talked a little bit about them, but they actually extend into the sternocleidomastoid muscles, right?
They extended into the sternocleidomastoid, yes.
I know you mentioned that, and just to be clear with the jury what that means that the stabs went through skin, fat, fascia, which is a layer of sinew, platysema, which is a layer of muscle, and then into the sternocleidomastoid muscle, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And he had to have surgery to repair his wounds, right?
That's correct.
Could I just have a moment?
Yes.
Nothing further.
Redirect.
No questions, Your Honor, thank you.
Release.
Yes, Your Honor.
Release.
Yes, Sharon.
Doctor, you may step down. You may be released as a witness at this time. Be careful out there. It's getting windy.
Thank you very much.
I'll ask the state to please call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. State would call crime scene investigator Brandon Douglas.
Brandon Douglas. Okay. Mr. Douglas, good afternoon and welcome.
Afternoon, sir.
If you'll raise your right hand, please. Thank you. Do you swear or affirm any testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God?
I do.
Thank you. If you'll follow the bailiff down to the ramp leads up to the witness chair, please watch your step. Go ahead, have a seat, make yourself comfortable. That microphone is fully adjustable. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon. Please introduce yourself to the jury, if you would.
Good afternoon. My name is Brandon Douglas.
And Mr. Douglas, what is your profession or employment?
I am a crime scene investigator.
And you're a crime scene investigator with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office?
Yes, sir.
Okay, tell us about your experience, your training, which qualifies you to be a crime scene investigator with the Sheriff's Office.
Sure. Well, I have a associate's in science degree in crime scene technology. I have a bachelor's degree. It's just in public safety administration. I've actually worked for, this is my third agency I've worked for. So every agency I've worked for, I've gone through a field training program, which has lasted anywhere from 3 months to 6 months. Altogether, I've been in crime scene for approximately 18 years. So I've gone through numerous training classes and a variety of topics related to crime scene investigation.
safe to say you've been to hundreds of crime scenes?
Yes, it is.
I want to draw your attention to May 28th, 2022, where you asked to respond to an address on Kite Ridge Drive relating to a death investigation.
Yes, sir, I was.
Tell us about how you got that information and what you did when you got that request.
Yes, at approximately 2:58 in the morning, I was requested to respond to 6209 Kite Ridge Drive. So once I did that, I was actually called in from home, a little early from home. So I got ready, responded to the scene, and I arrived at the scene at approximately 4:09 a.m.
So were you actually on duty when you got this call?
I was supposed to start at 6 a.m., so they called me in a little early.
So you responded, you got out there to Kite Ridge, and what did you first do, or who did you first speak with?
First, I met with Detective Van Gilder and actually CSI Janicek.
So there was another crime scene investigator, Ms. Janicek, who was already there,
Yes, sir.
and based upon the conversations you had with them or anybody else at the sheriff's office, what did you understand your responsibilities or requests were going to be?
So essentially, I was going to take over for CSI Janicek. She had worked the night shift, so I was going to relieve her.
And did you do that?
I did.
Were you aware that crime scene investigator Janicek had already performed some task related to this investigation?
Yes, I did.
And were you aware that the Janicek had taken had a swab that she turned over to you?
Yes, she did.
All right. Tell us about how you went about your job. What'd you do?
On the scene.
On the scene.
So CSI Janicek basically took photographs of the inside of the residence overalls, and I was kind of tasked to kind of come in behind her and meet with Detective Van Gilder. We were gonna he picked out items of evidence that he wanted collected, so I placed yellow evidence markers on those specific items, photographed them, and ultimately collected them.
That was from the interior of 6207 Kite Ridge?
Yes, sir, it was.
All right, so you collected some evidence. You actually took your own photographs
I
at
did.
6207. And what was the next task that you performed, or did you perform tasks in the course of that evidence collection and photographing of the interior of 6207?
I started in the inside of the house. The items he had picked out, I photographed and collected them, and we also kind of searched the kitchen area to look for any, see if there's any missing knives.
At some point, did Dr. Ashley Perkins arrive on the scene?
Yes, she did.
Okay, so and did you have any part or participation in anything that she was doing there at the scene that morning?
Yes, I was standing next to her while she's performing her examination. I was photographing and documenting that process.
Okay, so you're actually there with Dr. Perkins.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Were bags placed on Kay Baker's hands for evidence preservation?
Yes, they were.
And did you assist in that regard?
I did.
All right, we'll get to some of the details regarding the evidence inside of 6207 here in just a few minutes. Let's kind of round out the things that you did, the responsibilities that you had with the overall crime scene, if you would.
Sure. So after Dr. Perkins cleared the scene, I basically went to the backyard of 6207 and 6209, and there we were looking for any suspected blood, which we did find in both of those backyards. And I began to label the various spots of suspected blood with green evidence markers. I photographed that once the markers were in place, and then I ended up swabbing all of those stains I had marked.
And did you happen to notice that there was a window open and a screen door pushed out at 6207?
Yes, I did.
Did you have any? Did you photograph? First of all, did you photograph that area?
I did.
Did you otherwise take any steps to preserve either the dimensions of the window or otherwise participate in that evidence preservation?
Yes, sir. I put basically a tape measure up next to the window and took photographs with the tape measure.
All right, so you were green, right?
Yes, sir.
Was there another crime scene investigator there as well at some point in the crime scene investigation?
Yes, there was.
Who?
That would be CSI Durr.
That's DER?
Yes, sir.
Did crime scene investigator Durr also assist you at least in some ways in your job and your responsibilities or your review of the scene?
Yes, he was there with me, kind of helping identify suspected stains of blood on the ground.
Did you mentioned that you were green? Do you recall whether or not crime scene investigator Durr had his own separate responsibilities?
He did. I was there was a brush line that divided the main backyard of the residence. There was a brush line, and then the right of way and the Lithia Pinecrest. So he was responsible from the area north of the brush to Lithia Pinecrest.
So you're kind of the backyards of 6207, 6209, maybe 6211. That was your primary responsibility. Crime scene investigator Durr, do you remember what color he was using? Was he using green as well or not?
No, he actually used red evidence markers.
So if we look at the evidence markers, those little cones that they have, the green ones are basically you, and the red ones are basically crime scene investigator Durr.
Correct.
All right, you told us that you ended up swabbing those areas that you marked. And when you say swabbing, I want you to explain that process, if you would, to the jury, so that we can understand what it is and why you did it.
Sure. So the procedure we use for swabbing, we have sterile cotton tip swabs, which is basically a cotton tip on a wooden stick, essentially. So what I do would open the package, I apply a little distilled water to both of the cotton tip swabs, and then just swab the surface that we want to swab or collect the sample from.
Okay, and then what do you do to ensure its evidentiary integrity?
So the two swabs that are in the package, once I swab them, I place it back in the package, and the swab gets put in a white, basically mailing envelope, and that envelope goes into a yellow or a manila envelope.
And what is the purpose of taking a swab? What evidentiary value does it have potentially?
In this particular case, I was swabbing the suspected blood stains, so it collects the blood sample.
All right, and then in the process of having those markers, and you're primarily the green ones, and the different work that you did you then photograph those markers as they were positioned at the time that you collected the swabs?
I did.
So the markers are going to represent the locations of the swab that you took.
Correct.
All right, let's start off with the interior of 6207, if you could. I'm going to show you what has been marked for identification. States exhibits 34, 35, 36, and 40. If you would, take a look at each of those exhibits, those photographs, and tell me if you can identify them, and if they actually represent or depict the photographs or the interior of 6207 when you were conducting your investigation on May 28, 2022.
Yes, they do.
You know, at this time, state offers exhibits 34, 35, 36, and 40.
Any objection?
Just get a numerical, the number of the letters.
Are they composites? Yeah, if you could give us 34A through,
I apologize. It's 34A through C.
thank you, 35,
35A through G.
Sorry, is that G's?
G is in George. 36A through F, as in Frank. (40) A through P as in Peter.
any objection?
Maintain the prior objection,
Other than previous objections?
and that's specifically to states 34.
All right, other than previous objections to 34, any additional objections?
Your Honor.
All right, 34A through C, 35A through G, 36A through F, and 40A through P will be admitted at this time.
Thank you, Your Honor. And permission to publish, Your Honor?
You may.
Okay, first 34. 34A, do you recognize 34A? Or what can you tell us about 34A?
Yes, this was a wire hanger that was on an ottoman in the living room, which I labeled with yellow evidence marker number 2.
And is that the place you saw it or you found it?
It was.
And then B, that's the same hanger,
Yes, sir. That's a close-up of the hanger with a scale.
all right? And then C,
And that is a close-up of the hook part that's kind of bent out straight.
all right, so I don't know if I can get that lightened up any at all. There we go. Okay, so all of these are the same Exhibit 2. One's just closer and one's even closer.
Correct.
Okay, now we have 35. Here's 35A. So we can get it close enough where we can read it to you. Is that your handwriting?
It is.
Okay. Can you read what it says?
It should say master bedroom.
Okay. Because that's what it is?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's the door to the master bedroom.
Correct.
All right. And then here's B. And what room is that?
This is also in the master bedroom. That was a nightstand next to the bed, obviously.
Okay, let me focus in. There's an evidence marker 3, and what's that evidence marker related to?
That is actually marking a cell phone, which is to the right of the evidence marker.
To right of 3. You took that into evidence.
I did.
And here's C of 35. What's that?
So what I'm capturing here at the top picture is that nightstand we talked about previously.
Okay.
And so kind of in front of the nightstand and next to the bed is like a door strike plate.
Okay, and here we have D. And what's that?
And that was, I believe that was the piece of the doorknob, the part that sticks out into the door jamb.
And it says master bedroom, and that's where it's from?
Correct.
That's your writing?
Yes, it is.
E? What's E?
This is the strike plate I was referring to in not the previous photograph, but the one before.
Again, from the master bedroom?
Yes, sir.
F?
And this is the door to the master bedroom, just showing there's a kind of the damage or the splintered on the opening side there.
To the master bedroom.
Yes, sir.
And G?
And that is a close-up of the just the door lock mechanism.
Okay. All right, let's move on to 36A through F. Here's A. Zoom out a little bit so we get an overall first. And what is 36A?
This is a photograph in the kitchen on top of the on the counter there above the dishwasher. I was marking a cell phone, which I had marked with yellow evidence marker number 1.
Okay. Is that the cell phone to our left of marker 1?
Yes, it is.
And I guess is a this is a little closer close-up of 1. Is that right?
Correct.
There's also a number 1. Is this the reverse side of that cell phone?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's the back side.
Okay. Okay. That's number 1. And so here is 36D. Are we back in the bedroom?
Yes, this is back in the master bedroom.
Okay. And again, that's you mentioned that number 3 was a cell phone.
Correct.
And then 36E.
That is a close-up of that.
That's a
Same
close-up of the
Yes,
of
sir.
exhibit number 3.
Yes, sir.
And then F. That's a closer close-up. Is that correct?
Correct. That would be the front side, the screen side.
The front side. Okay. Okay, that's 36. Next we have 40. We got 40A. Okay, what's 40A?
This is also in the kitchen. This was a knife block on top of the counter.
From the same kitchen area that the cell phone was from?
Correct.
Exhibit number 1, okay. All right, and this is 40B. What's 40B?
This is a close-up of that same knife block.
All right, in that same kitchen at 6207.
Correct.
And here's C, 40C. What's 40C?
And this is just another view so you can kind of see the top side of that knife block.
Okay, let me focus it in, zoom it in a little bit and see if we can read anything. There's an empty space for a knife block. Can you tell what that says?
Yes, that says 3-inch bird's beak.
Benji, do you want to approach? Sure. Jeff.
Okay, and here's 40D. And what's 40D?
So this is a picture of that same knife block. I had pulled originally the previous picture show the bottom, the first row there. To the right, those two empty slots were empty. So I pulled the one just to the left of the empty slot just to get a picture of what those knives actually look like.
And when you were there, and based upon your observations, did it appear that the knife that's in the hand matches the handles of the other knives?
Yes, it does.
Okay, and here is 40E. If you would take a look at 40E. What's 40E?
So this is in the dishwasher. We found two black-handled steak knives in the dishwasher. So that same knife I had pulled out, I'm putting against the knives we found in the dishwasher just to show they're the same brand.
Okay, so the knives in the dishwasher match the other knives that were in the block.
Correct.
And here's F. Here's 40F. And what's 40F?
So this is kind of a mid-range picture. So I'm showing the front half of the photograph was the kitchen area where you can see evidence marker number 2. And then towards the top left of the picture, you can see evidence marker number 2 in the background.
And there's an open dishwasher there. Is that the dishwasher that you were earlier referring to?
It was.
And 40G. Is that just another angle of the same area?
It is.
H. Again, same dishwasher, same area, just from a different angle.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and 40 I. That's the same dishwasher.
It is.
Okay, there's knives indicated in that dishwasher, correct?
Correct. They're two kind of black-handled steak knives, which were similar to the steak knives in the knife block.
J, same dishwasher.
Yes, so I closed the top shelf. This is just the second shelf.
And K,
Same dishwasher, just showing the bottom shelf.
just showing the bottom shelf. L,
And this is just a photograph of the kitchen sink.
and the contents of the kitchen sink were the contents that you found them.
Correct.
Same with the dishwasher. Whatever was or wasn't in the dishwasher is what you photographed.
Correct.
Okay, and here's 40M. See if I can. Same kitchen, 6207.
Yes, it is.
What is depicted in that photo?
So this was the silverware drawer in the kitchen.
And here's N, 40N. Zoom out a little bit. Again, another the kitchen drawer.
Yes, sir.
And then O.
And this is that same kitchen drawer. You can see we found kind of 4 brown wooden handled steak knives in the top part of that drawer.
And then P,
And that is just a close up of the 4 steak knives we found from the drawer.
okay, we kind of inventoried the photographs that you took in the interior of 6207. I'm going to show you some additional photographs. If you would take a look at these photographs, and they are 41 A through W, 42 A through V as in Victor, 43 A through Y, and 44 A through Y. So as to 41 A through W, 42 A through V, 43 A through Y, and 44 A through Y, if you would take a look at those photographs. Okay, as to those exhibits in 41, 42, 43, and 44, Mr. Douglas, will you take over those photographs and tell me if they fairly and accurately depict the scene in the area 6207 through 6211, Kite Ridge, on May 28, 2022.
Yes, they do.
Thank you. This time, Your Honor, the state offers State's Exhibit 41 A through W, 42 A through V, 43 A through Y, and 44 A through Y.
Well, the last one was also Y?
It is, Your Honor.
All right, so any objection?
No objection.
41 A through W, 42 A through V, 43 A through Y, and 44 A through Y will be admitted at this time.
All right, let's start off with 41. If you can, tell us what this depicts and orient us, if you can, relating to this crime scene, either by residence number or other references that will be helpful.
Sure. So this photograph is showing, I already have my green evidence markers put down. The house on the left is 6209 and the house on the right is 6211.
Okay, and those evidence markers, is that T in the front,
It is.
and then S
Yes, sir.
in the back, and so on, okay? Is 41B another example of that same area, maybe a little closer up? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, it is.
And there appears to be some discoloration in the grass just to the lower left of T. Is that discoloration relating to the position of K. Baker?
Yes, it is.
And is that a close-up? This is 41C. That's a close-up of that same area.
Yes, sir, it is.
And 41D. Same area.
It is. Kind of the bottom right of the picture is that area we were discussing on the previous photograph, and the center and the top is the porch to 6209.
And it appears to be some sort of measuring device that's beneath the railing there.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Did you put that there?
I did.
And it's a ruler, basically, essentially a ruler.
Yeah, tape measure.
The tape measure, and those are tape measure in inches. Is that right?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. And here's another. Is that a close up? This is E41. E, is that a close up of that same tape measure area of 6209?
It is, and in the center you can see I labeled some of the red suspected blood with the green scale, and I labeled it DD Delta Delta.
Delta Delta. T is the same area?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. And this is G. Let's turn to G. What is G?
This is that same photograph. You can see the green marker T. The top portion of the photograph is another tape measure I laid down, and on the left side of the photograph is the front porch. It's a 6209.
So the T on this photo is the same T that we looked at on the previous photograph.
Yes, sir.
And here's S, as in Sam. I mean, photograph 41H. What does this depict?
That is another large area of suspected blood in between the house of 6209 and 6211.
Same photograph with tape measure?
Yes, sir.
(41J).
This one is another large area of suspected blood, which I had labeled with the green marker R, as in Romeo. This is actually on the west side of 6211, kind of near the front porch.
There's appear to be some sort of red-colored, like an arch pattern on the side of the wall at the base.
Correct.
Is that the way you found it?
It is.
Okay, 41K. Sorry.
And this is just another view of that same area.
here's L. Same area now with the tape measure?
Yes, sir.
And here's 41M.
This is that same area. I'm just showing the wall portion of the residence with a tape measure.
Okay, here's 41Q. Orient us as to 41Q, if you could, please.
So this is also between.
I'm sorry. No, it's N. It is N with a marker that's designated Q. This is N, 41N.
This is between 6209 and 6211. This fence here is basically the front area of the fence, which belongs to 6211's residence.
And are you looking into the front yard, or are we looking to the backyard? The backyard's the top of the photograph?
Yeah, I'm standing in the front looking towards the back.
Thank you. And here's O. This is 41O. What does this depict?
And that is a close-up of some suspected blood on that little grass leaf right in the center there. And I used green marker Q. It's in Quebec.
So you mentioned all these markers that were made. You took swabs from the suspected blood there.
Correct, I did.
And here's 41P.
And that is that same photograph. I just used the scale.
And now we have 41Q. Tell us about 41Q.
So this is near the letter marker Q. This is that front fence I was talking about. So this red stain I have labeled CC, Charlie Charlie.
Okay. .41R. Let me zoom out so you can orient us, please.
So this photograph in particular, you can see the two green scales I used on kind of the center of the photograph. This is actually the east side of 6209 near the back.
Okay, and again, you're looking into the backyard?
Yes, sir.
Where is, if you're looking at that photograph, where is that wooded area relating to the case?
Basically the top of the photograph. So if you're looking straight back, the top area, that's where the brush line starts.
And let me focus in here a little bit if I can. And did you put those markers there?
I did.
And here's another one. Were they designated by number or letter?
Letters. This, if you zoom out, the green scale kind of closest to our vantage point was labeled BB, Bravo Bravo, and the one above that or to the right of that was labeled AA, Alpha Alpha.
All right, so it's BB is the one that's basically at the more to the bottom of this photograph as we're looking at it.
Correct.
And above that and to the right of that is what designation?
AA.
That's AA. Thank you. All right, now we got 41S as in Sam. Tell us about S if you can. Let me zoom out so we can become more oriented.
So here I'm just kind of, if you see to the right, that is the 6209 address. So I'm kind of standing in the backyard, actually looking towards the front yard.
And we just talked about these markers right here, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right. And we've previously talked about the markers that are on the grass in previous photographs, right? Correct. Right, and here's T. Here's 41T. Let me zoom out. This 41T. Is that same wall at 6209?
Correct. You can see our marker scale I have there, AA and BB.
So now we can read AA and BB better. Okay. Thank you. And now we've got, zoom out. Here's 41U. What's 41U?
And this is a close-up of what I had marked AA, suspected blood with a tape measure in view.
Same AA that we've been talking about.
Yes, sir.
And then 41V.
And this is showing what I had labeled BB, our suspected blood with a tape measure in view.
Okay. All right, just to be clear, there's only one green BB, just as like there's only one green T, a Q, and R in the remaining.
Correct.
So you did that specifically to make sure that there was no misunderstanding as to what the markers were and which one was which.
Correct.
I finished with that number. Let's go on to 42. Okay, 42A. What are we looking at?
So this is the backyard of 6209. So to the right, you can see the fence line we kind of discussed. That's the fence line of 6211. So I'm standing near the back of 6209, looking north or towards the back. The brush is there at the top of the picture, and on the other side of the brush is Lithia Pinecrest.
Okay, and there's a marker here. Let
Yes,
me
sir.
see if I can focus in, get us a little closer. Did you put that marker there? Is it O?
Yes, I did, and yes, it is.
Okay. And I see something green on the fence over here at this area. Was that there before, or did you put that there?
I put that there.
Okay. Appears to be maybe some other markers along the fence.
Yes.
We're going to get to those.
Yes, sir.
Here's B. Okay. Let's zoom out. Okay, what's 42B?
So this is that fence line we previously talked about. You can see the marker O kind of in the lower right-hand corner of the photograph,
Okay.
and it's kind of hard to see, but there are green scales labeling suspected blood along that fence line.
Okay. Okay. .42C.
That is a close-up of some suspected blood that I label with marker O. You can see if you're looking at the marker, kind of the lower right marker, there's like a grass petal there that has a red stain on it.
Okay. And let's look at D, 42D. Let me zoom out a little bit first. What's that? What is it? What is D?
That is that same stain. I just added a scale to it.
Mr. Dirks, before you go to the next one, it's been